Hello and welcome to Louise Singleton Creations. In today's video I will be making a striking illuminated Halloween scene using Aqua Cast and BioCast from Resins along with my fantastic new Halloween mould from Moulds and Shapes. If that sounds like spooky fun, stay tuned and enjoy the video. Right, this is the main mould I'll be using today. It's from Moulds and Shapes' new range of Halloween moulds and it's called the Evil Pumpkin Shield mould and I couldn't wait to have a go with it. So you know me by now, I don't keep things simple. I wanted to make this into a light up scene and I wanted my lights to be behind the pumpkin and I didn't want the whole pumpkin to light up, I just wanted the light to come through the eyes and the nose and the mouth and the other details that are in there. So I didn't want to use epoxy resin for the pumpkin. I decided to use Aqua Cast casting compound from Resins because I thought that would work best. The light will only shine through the eyes and the mouth and it won't shine through the Aqua Cast. That was my hope anyway. We'll see what happens. Right then, let's get started. First of all, I needed to weigh out my Aqua Cast. I got my silicone cup and I weighed out 20 grams of water with 50 grams of the powder. That's slightly more water than the regular mixing ratio because I want my solution to be a little bit thinner to flow nicely into all those small details. And that's the great thing with Aqua Cast. You can add more water if you want to, because all the special properties that make Aqua Cast so good are fused into the powder, not the liquid. You're just using water, so more or less water is fine. You can adjust it to whatever your requirements are, really. Right, once everything was measured out, I gave it a good mix. I've kept it in real time just to show you how quickly and easily the powder dissolves into the water to make a nice smooth paste. The fact that I've added a little bit extra water does help as well. As you can see already, it's beautiful and smooth and it's ready for the pigment. The pigments I'm using today are from Homeware Design on Etsy. I'm using Vivid Orange and Avocado, and I love this avocado green, it's gorgeous. I do wish with hindsight that I'd added a little bit more pigment, but never mind, it worked out okay, but you'll see what happened later on. But I do love these colours and I will leave a link in the video description. And now it's time to add the coloured Aqua Cast into the mould. There are a few different ways of applying the Aqua Cast. I decided to use a little spoon at first for that small stalk area, just to spoon it in carefully and then move it around with a little micro brush. I found that way it worked well. I had good control over it, and for the bigger areas I did spoon it on with my stirring stick, and you can even try pouring it on. The thing is, if you go over the edges, it's easy to clean up, so don't worry too much. Once you've finished applying your Aqua Cast, if you give your table a bit of a bang, it will level out really nicely, as you will see here. There we go. Or you can wiggle your mould, that's another way of doing it. And whilst I'm on the subject of the mould, I must tell you that I've put this mould on my little levelling table, which, obviously keeps it level, but there's another really important reason for putting it onto another surface which can be moved, and that is because once the Aqua Cast has cured, it's going to be just a very, very thin layer, and if you start moving your mould about, you could really crack the Aqua Cast because it's such a thin layer and you don't want it to be cracking. So, at this stage, once I'd started adding the Aqua Cast and it had cured, I didn't move the mould again after that. I just moved the whole levelling table when I needed the space at my table, but I didn't pick up the mould. Right then, I'm going to speed it up now because it did take me a long time. You do need to take your time with this, and that's another wonderful thing about the Aqua Cast. It's got a long working time. A lot of the two-part casting compounds, you've only got like 10 minutes or something to work. But with this, especially with that extra little bit of water that I added, it's got a good long working time. I think it was about between 30 and 40 minutes I had to do this. So it was lovely, and yeah, I got it all done, no problem. I had some Aquacast left over, and I also had this other pumpkin mould from Moulds and Shapes, which is like little pumpkins that can be hung up to make almost like a bunting type thing. So yeah, I thought I'd pour the leftover Aquacast into those. Right, an hour later, the Aquacast was cured and it was time to fill in the trees, and for that I'm using resin. The resin I'm using is called BioCast, and that's also from Elichem Resins. You may have seen me use it before, but it was called EnviroCast. That was when it was in its very first stages, and now it's been released. They've decided to change the name, which I'm glad they have. I think BioCast is easier to say than EnviroCast. So yeah, that's what I'm using today, BioCast resin. It's a 1-to-1 mixing ratio by volume, so I've got this tiny measuring cup here because I only want a small amount. I'm going to be using 10 millilitres of the resin and 10 millilitres of the hardener. I gave it a good stir for about 2 minutes and then added some black mica powder. I think it was from Arteza. And yeah, it's got a nice little sparkly effect to it rather than, just being a solid black. That's why I decided to use mica powder rather than pigment paste. Okay, so once it was all mixed up, it was time to apply it to all those branches and around the edge of the mould, just in the same way as before. I started off being very careful, trying to get it into all those tiny bits, but it was very fiddly, and what I ended up doing was just being messy, because I found that it was easier to be messy and tidy up the mess than it was to be careful and get it into all the bits. If that makes sense, that's just the way I found it was easier. But, you do it however you want to. Right, 6 hours later and all the black resin was cured, I decided to add some gold pigment powder around the edge of the mould so that it would have a nice gold border. And this pigment powder clings nicely to the mould, and it's a nice easy way to just add that finishing touch. I first saw this on Toonpish Crafts. Wendy did this, and it inspired me to do it, and ever since then I've done it lots and lots and lots. So thank you, Wendy, for inspiring me in the first place. It's such a great technique. Next, I mixed up 100 millilitres of the bio resin. I kept it clear. I just wanted a shallow layer over the top of the pumpkin, so it kind of had windows for the lights to shine through on those eyes and the mouth. So let me take just a moment to tell you a little bit about this fabulous new resin. BioCast is sustainable and eco-friendly art resin. It's substantially reduced in its carbon content. It can be used for shallow casting up to 10 millimetres. It's got 23% bio content, and that's biomass from the paper and pulp industry, which I think is amazing. It's got optical clarity and UV resistance, and it's non-flammable. The mix ratio is 1-to-1 by volume. It's designed for coating, resin art, geode work and shallow mould pours. The curing time is 5 to 6 hours to be touch dry, and it's got a full chemical cure in 5 to 7 days. The pot life is 40 minutes and the shelf life in a sealed container is 1 year. So that's all the technical stuff for this brand new resin over with, but I think you will agree with that 23% bio content. It really is a game changer for the resin industry. Right, it's the next day and the clear layer is cured and we're almost ready to add some colour. But before I can do that, I need to make a barrier so that I can have a cavity for the lights to go in behind the pumpkin. I've cut 2 strips of acetate and joined them together because 1 strip of A4 acetate wasn't long enough. So I've got a long strip and I'm just applying some hot melt glue, just a little bit at first to keep it in position, and then gradually I add more and more until the barrier goes all the way around. I almost used 2-part epoxy putty for this, but I thought a lot of you won't have that, and I don't really want to keep using things that you haven't got and making you go out to the shops or go and spend money online. I didn't want to be doing that. So I thought, what's something that everybody's got? Well, most people have a glue gun and most people have access to some clear plastic. The reason I'm using clear plastic is because it comes away from the resin quite easily. Once the barrier was in place, I decided to add just a little bit of water just to see if there was any leaky bits anywhere, because the last thing you want is your resin leaking through the barrier. It might be a bit of a pain to add water and then mop it up, but it saves you in the long run. It's better to find out now if you've got any spots in your barrier where it's leaking. That's what I think anyway. So I did that and it was fairly quick and easy to do. And there were no leaks, which was a bonus. Right then, let's add some colour. I've mixed up 200 millilitres of the BioCast resin and I'm going to be using the hot pink pigment powder from Elichem Resins. Now, the hot pink powder is a neon colour, and I have found that neon colours can be a bit grainy and a bit difficult to dissolve if you put them directly into your epoxy resin. So what I did was I took a generous amount of the hot pink pigment powder because I really wanted it to be really bright, so I put plenty in there. Added a splash of isopropyl alcohol. As you can see, it was just a splash, and then gave it a good mix until all the little lumps dissolved and I had a nice smooth paste. Then I was able to add the epoxy resin to that and give it a really good mix. And the other colour I'm going to be using is Deep Hyacinth Blue, and that's from Laura's Art Corner. You've probably seen me use it quite a lot if you've seen my other videos, because it is one of my favourites. It's such a luscious colour. It's just gorgeous. Even in the pot, can you see how it just glows? Yeah, it's a beautiful colour. So anyway, I'm getting a good generous scoop of that, and I'm going to be using that around the outside of the design. And here we go, the deep blue around the edges. I didn't want too much. I wanted the main colour to be the hot pink, but I was hoping the dark blue would help make some really nice effects as it started to move towards the middle whilst it cures. And then the hot pink next to that. I just love this hot pink. Isn't it just gorgeous? So yeah, and just next to the blue, I'm adding the pink. And then once that's all applied, I'm going to be just adding a little bit of clear in the middle. And then you just cross your fingers and hope that some magic will happen when you leave it to cure. Right then, the next day, you can see that there's something interesting going on with the resin, but you will never know until you see it from the front. So we'll think about that later. Let's get this barrier off. Now, it was a bit tricky at first, and what I had to do was get my heat gun and soften the glue with the heat gun, and then once the glue was softened, the barrier came out quite easily. Right, next I tried removing the glue. It was a right pain. The glue didn't want to come out, and I thought, oh Lou, you've made a big mistake here using hot melt glue. But then I had a brainwave. I thought to myself, hang on, you're adding your lights around the edge. Why don't you just melt the glue with your heat gun and then put your lights in, and it will help the lights to stay in position. So yeah, I wish I'd thought about that before I got half of the glue out. But anyway, that worked in the end. Right, so here I am just softening the glue so it's nice and sticky, ready to put my lights in. I've already coiled my lights up so that they fit into the cavity. It's just a strip of, those tiny LED lights. I can't think how many lights are on it. But anyway, I wanted them to be just around the edge and hopefully not show through the eyes and nose and mouth. I wanted them to glow, make the cavity glow without seeing the actual lights. If you get what I mean, it'll all become clear soon. Trust me, it will become clear. So anyway, just adding them to that soft glue, and then I needed to add a little bit more hot glue from my glue gun just to make sure they all stayed in place. Right, once that was done, before making the cover for that cavity, I decided to take it out of the mould because I thought, if it's gone wrong, I don't want to go to any more effort making covers and things, It can be a bit scary making videos because you go to all that trouble, and if it goes wrong, your video's over really. Anyway, let's see how it turned out. Right then, being my own worst critic, I immediately saw the bits I wasn't happy with. But let's concentrate on the good things first. That pink colour and the tree design and the bats over the pink looks amazing. And trust me, don't turn off yet, because when you see that with the light behind it, it is completely transformed. It's amazing. So that's the good thing. Now, the pumpkin. Couple of things I would have changed. I would have added more pigment. If I did it again, I would have added more of the pigment. I wasn't completely happy with that, but that's okay because you'll see what happens next. And the resin, in some of the places where the Aqua Cast was just a little bit thinner than everywhere else, the resin has made it a little bit patchy, but only a little bit. It's not too bad. And in a minute, we'll go back to that and I'll show you how I made it better. But for now, let's just quickly make a cover for the back. Now, this cover, I'm using mirrored vinyl. It's a gold mirror vinyl, and I've cut it to the right size to go behind the pumpkin. And what I wanted to do was have that mirror effect there to reflect the lights so that it really glows even more. With the lights not actually showing through the eyes, I wanted to make sure that at least they would reflect from that mirror through the eyes and mouth. Oh, I'm forgetting how to speak now. I think I need a coffee. That's what I need, a coffee. Anyway, so I stuck it to some black card, and then all I did was I cut it out with a little bit of extra around the edge so that I had something to attach it to the resin. So yeah, there's my pretty face in the reflection. I didn't realise I'd got myself in the reflection. Oh, nice, eh? Okay. So once that was done, I cut a little bit of a slot out of one side so the wire could come through a little bit easier. And then I just used a few spots of hot melt glue. I was being a little bit lazy, I think. And can you see there's a bit of glue that's fallen off and I'd forgotten about. So I had to remove that afterwards. Never mind, eh? So yeah, I'm just adding a little bit of hot melt glue to stick it down. You might do it more professionally, but at this stage I just wanted it on, and yeah, it's only for my own use, and I wasn't worried about it looking, really professional at the back. As long as that cavity was covered and I had the mirror for how it would look at the front, that's all I was really concerned about. Okay, back to the pumpkin. Now, as I've said, I wasn't happy with the amount of pigment I added. It was my own fault. The pigments are gorgeous, and if I just added more, this would have looked so good. But yeah, it's okay having hindsight, isn't it? But never mind. It would be good if we could see into the future, eh? I had some acrylic markers and I wanted to see how they would work on the Aqua Cast. And actually, the green works really well on the stalk. I started with the stalk in case it didn't look good, and then it was only one small part of it that I wasn't happy with. But actually, I did like it. The colour was very intense, and so yeah, probably a bit too intense to use on the pumpkin. So once I'd done the stalk with the acrylic markers, I decided to get out my Copic markers, which are alcohol ink, and see what they would do for the pumpkin. So I did some highlights on the pumpkin, and yeah, I liked it. Just around some of the edges, and it looked good. And in the places where I'd applied the orange, I just wanted to blend it a little bit. And so I got a Q-tip with some isopropyl alcohol on it and just smoothed it over where I'd added the orange, and it blended it in just a little bit so it wasn't too, I didn't want it to be really obvious where I'd used the pen. So yeah, I'm much happier with it now. And where that black had seeped into the chin at the bottom, yeah, that's much better now that I've coloured over it and disguised it. And now it's time for the base. I needed to be able to stand it up in that mould and put the resin in the base without it falling over. So here I'm just making kind of a, what would you call it, a rest, for it to rest on. I've just taken 2 heavy tubs and I'm just sticking my ruler onto it, and then my piece that I've just made can lean on it and stay upright. That was the idea anyway. And the mould that I've got in the, that at the bottom, that's what I'm using to make my base. It's just a picture frame mould from Let's Resin. It's one of those ones where you make the rectangular picture and then put it into a stand. And I thought that rectangular shape, or it's almost square actually, but I thought that would work just right to stand up my my Halloween picture in, and then add the resin. So yeah, that's what I was doing there, just preparing it. And now here's my resin. I've mixed up some neon green, which I think is a perfect Halloween colour. Isn't it great? I wanted it to look like a slimy river, and it's the perfect colour for a slimy river. So it was just a case of adding all that into the mould and then putting my picture into position. So here we are, the barrier is coming forward, the resin's ready, and the picture just needs to go in. And so let's see if it works. Right, the barrier definitely kept it upright. The only thing is, with the resin in there, the picture was wanting to slide in the resin at the base and just slide forward. So I took some tape. Sorry, my arm's in the way because the tape's behind the thing. I just took some tape and just stuck the picture to the ruler, which is acting as a barrier, and that kept that into position nicely. No problems at all. Next, I found this jar of dark decorative stones, and I thought they would work really well, and then just sprinkled them on either side of the slimy, spooky Halloween river. And once they were in, I took my pumpkins, which I'd made earlier. Do you remember with my leftover Aqua Cast, I made some small pumpkins? Well, I thought 2 of those would look nice. Well, not nice. I can't use the word nice in the Halloween video. Super spooky. I thought they'd look super spooky, stood just in front of the big pumpkin. So I got those, and then it was a case of trying to balance them in the slime, and it took a while just to get it just right. But once they were in, I think it finished it off just perfectly. Once the base was cured, I couldn't wait to take off all the tape, remove the supports and get it out of the mould to get a final look of how this would look. And of course, we need to see it all lit up in the dark, don't we? So let's get it all freed up and see how it looks. Right, because the base was so shallow, once I took it out the mould, it was still a little bit bendy. But after a couple of days, that will be completely rigid. So the thing is, with it being bendy, I can make sure I put it on a flat surface and get it really flat. And yeah, it's looking good. We'll have some close-ups in just a moment. I wanted to start off with a close-up of the resin effect with light behind it. Look at those spooky lines. I think that looks so spooky. I think it works perfectly. So yeah, I'm really happy with the pink and blue resin effect. And here it is without the fairy lights switched on, just in the daytime. And I think even without the lights on, it looks really good. So yeah, I'm happy with that. And here it is with the same lighting, but with the fairy lights switched on. So yeah, obviously they don't show up as well as they will in complete darkness, but you can still see them. And here it is in complete darkness. So obviously you lose a bit of the detail on the rest of it, but you see the pumpkin really well. And I love the reflection in the work surface. Really like that. So we've reached the end of the video. It's been a long one this week, but I've enjoyed it and I hope you have too. My thanks go to all of you for watching and for your support as always, but I would also like to thank Edichem Resins for their Aqua Cast and BioCast, along with Moulds and Shapes for their wonderful Halloween moulds, and Homeware Designs for their gorgeous pigments. All in all, everybody's been very generous, so thank you. Thank you everyone for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.